I spent the best part of 37 years with nearly going to every jail in the country out of the last 40 years and being out now 3 years, the longest I've been out, and now proud to say that I am crime-free.
This is Sampson Misra, better known inside as Yammy B, a former criminal. He spent most of his life behind bars.
I started out on my institutional journey about 1980, 1981, where I stabbed my abuser in the children's home and went to prison, young prison, very, very early.
This is Matt from Underworld Uncut, and this week we're hearing about his experiences. From kids' homes and early burglaries to prison jungle work and saving the life of a female prison probation officer.
They used to call me Jammy Sammy. So then when I got in deeply into the prison stuff, and the name Yammy comes from jammy, yammy, meaning it's a slang yamming, like you're yamming food. But really, what they were really talking about was me yamming everybody else's drugs. And the B stood for the bumblebee, because I was a bit of a stinger. Like I'd pull tricks on people, and it's like being stung by a bumblebee.
Before the nicknames and the years behind bars, Yammy's life started in a broken home in East London. And it wasn't long before he ended up bouncing from children's homes to Borstal.
It wasn't a very happy household with mum and dad. My dad used to hit my mum. I was a mummy's boy and always used to protect her. And then my dad had a stroke. My mum took an overdose. There was no one to look after me and my sisters. So we ended up in the care of Westminster. And I was about 11 years old. From being at home and the shock of moving into a children's home, I didn't really take to it too well. I suffered at the hands of an abuser while I was there. And a year or so in, flipped out one day after reporting it. No one believed me, nothing was done about it. I didn't like to go to school during this period, or used to try because I couldn't stop crying. And then one morning he said, "You got to go to school." I said, "No, I'm not going." He picked me up and he threw me outside the balcony and shut the door. And the other school kids that were going to school with me started laughing. So I went into my bag, I pulled out the geometry set, I got a compass out that I used to draw circles with, and I was still only about 4 foot. I was very underdeveloped. I was like 11 years old, but I looked about 4. So I pressed the doorbell, and this 6'2" giant answered it like he was going to come out. But I rushed into him and stabbed him multiple times with the compass. But I kind of felt exhilarated, and the adrenaline in me was really high that I found a way to fight back through all the stuff that I was suffering from during that stay in the children's home. And I got on the bus, and I remember sitting with the kids and they were going, "Sammy, you all right?" And I was happy kind of thing. But when I got to school, the police turned up and come and took me from the school. I appeared in court. The social worker told me to plead guilty, so I pleaded guilty, and they put me in Stamford House, a young boys' prison. It was run different than institutions back then. They used to call you out in assembly, and if you messed about at night and the night man put it in the book, they'd call you to the front, and you'll go there and you'll drop something on the floor. When you go to pick it up, he'll slap you in the face, and then the whole assembly room would start laughing at you. It was really like that back in the day. Couldn't really get away with doing all that now. I spent 10 months at St. Thomas More, an approved school for bad boys and delinquents and boys that haven't, came from broken homes. I see a few of them today who've come through the other end as well, but a lot don't make it, I'm afraid. They stay emotionally disturbed forever. But while I was there, for those 10 months, the last month, because I couldn't get no home leaves, I ran away. But it's very difficult to run away in Horsham, Sussex, because the train station is miles away. And I tried it before, but you run out in your pajamas at night, but they find out and you get nicked before you get to the police station. You have to know the route and everything. But on the final go, I made it. I got there in the morning, or I got a lift, I think, to the station and got on the train. And then I stayed with one of those early friends who were habitually involved in burgling rich premises. I stayed at their house for about 3 or 4 weeks, but of course we were stealing and burgling, sadly, every day. And one of them got arrested, called me and my other friend's name, and I coughed up to about 16 burglaries when they asked me to, and I ended up in detention centre, which was a short, sharp shock. When I was in the juvenile court, the laid bench of 2 ladies and a man, They said to me, look, Sampson, we want you to go to another home further away. We don't want you to go to detention centre. We don't think it's going to be any good for you. And I turned around and said to them all, I said, no. I said, I don't want to go back to no home. I want to go to detention centre. Can you believe that? I thought it would make me hard, but I wanted to be able to tell people that I'd done the short, sharp shock, and I wanted to go through it. And as soon as you get off the bus, the officers are waiting there, and it's a different kind of game now. And I'm standing there, and they said, right, stand there. I'm not your mother. I'm not your social worker. I'm an effing prison officer, a screw, and I'm here to screw you right down to the ground. He goes, what's your name? I went, Sammy. Slap. Surname, and say, sir. Boom. And then you get your kit. You go for reception. And I was so small, I couldn't really carry the blanket and all that. And he said, right, now run down to that corridor and go down here and get something to eat. But as you run down the corridor, it says no running. So when you get down to the other end, there's another one waiting. He says, can't you read? Slap again.
Yammy's time in children's homes, approved school and detention centres came to an end. But he was far from reformed.
I went back to my mum and dad's after that detention centre because obviously my care order had run out. But when I went back to my mum and dad's, it was the first time I felt actually free since I was 10. And I kind of liked being back with my mum, but it always held that house the night of when we went into care. And everybody was crying and the social services were trying to pull us to the car and all the neighbours was out. So it held like deep, sad memories for me anyway. But only this time now, I'm entrenched in crime and burgling. So for about 3 months, I meet my first love, my first ever relationship. Didn't really last long because I got arrested in St. Albans in a Boy Scout uniform where somebody was getting me to knock on doors with a bucket and sponge, pretending to ask for odd jobs. And if they didn't answer, my older friend would go in and burgle it, or I'd go in there with him. So I ended up going to St. Albans Crown Court, and I ended up getting 4 years for 5 burglaries by Justice Drake. And the social worker was in court. She stood up in the box, the dock. The justice was saying, yes, well, you know, what do you think? She goes, well, we've run out of options for him. He's immature. He's got a bone structure of a 10-year-old and blah, 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 that kind of stuff. And Justice Drake, he turned around and said, you may be immature, but you are one of the maturest burglars I have ever seen. My sister was in the gallery upstairs crying. I looked behind me and I was crying as well. So I had to get in a van with 2 older guys that got less time than me for worse crimes, who were habitual criminals who've been through the system already. I had to get in the bus with them and they sent me to the adult jail at 16, 17 years old to Brixton, HMP, for a couple of weeks before they could transfer me to HMP Chelmsford, which was a miniature Wandsworth, really, very serious place. I remember I used to come down for breakfast in the morning and the staff used to take the piss out of me and say, oh, do you want us to phone your mum? I came out of Aylesbury in 1985. I had another girlfriend, I think, for a short period. I was back at home with mum and dad and started burgling with older guys that I met from prison now as well, where we was going out every day. And then around about late 1985, after being out about 4 months, got a big haul of diamonds from down in Regent's Park, got away with it and got arrested and was back in custody for something else. I left fingerprints somewhere, then I went to court, Knightsbridge Crown Court, and a judge let me out to go to a probation course. He said he'd done too much custody for a young boy and let me out, right? Wasn't out long again, broke that order and ended up with another 3 or 4 in 1985, 1986.
Whilst in prison, Yammy saved the life of a prison parole officer and received the royal warrant from Queen Elizabeth II.
I was in Wandsworth Jail in 1989. My son's mother was pregnant and she just had the baby and she was bringing him up every week. But then in the early days of Wandsworth, they used to put slips under the door the night before to tell you that you're getting moved to another prison without much warning. I got the notice in the door, but I got 2 days notice. They're saying you're going to the Isle of Wight in 2 days' time. But obviously, I'm panicking because I'm thinking I'm not going to get no visits and I'm not going to see the newborn baby, my son, too regularly because it's too far for her to travel. So I realised if I could get down and see the probation officer and tell her my predicament. So I'm thinking I would tell her that I won't be able to see my son and it's going to really ruin my family ties. Can you keep me here and get me to a prison not so far? I was going to try that trick that many used back then with chaplains and probations, and sometimes it worked. So that morning, I went on exercise. You go around the centre, you come off your wing to go through another wing to get onto the exercise yard. So when I was coming in, instead of going back to my cell, because you go at 9 a.m, 10 o'clock, you exercise an hour, full hour. You come back, single file, you go straight to your doors and they bang you up. And the staff officers go for their tea break. But I was thinking, hold on, if I go down, come off the exercise yard, I'll go down, there's 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s landing. I was on the 3s landing, but I went down onto the 1s landing, went to the toilets that are in the recesses where you can do number 1s, but obviously they weren't in the cells. So I sat down on the toilet as exercise was banging up, and I put my feet up against the door so that I'm expecting the prison officers to look under the door of the toilet, and if they don't see feet, they won't think that anybody is in there. Then I heard everyone banging up, and then it all went quiet and peaceful. So then I knew that was my time. So I crept up onto the 2s. There was a line of about 5 men. The probation officer's that way. The prison office and tea room is that way. And the unit of the office where the staff normally are in, if they're not on breaks, here. So the queue's there, but they're standing like that in single file, waiting to go in and see the probation officer there. So I got to the back of the queue, but I haven't made an application. So I thought, well, let me try and push to the front and push the door open. So I pushed to the front to try and get there and open the door and just have a quick word with her. But when I opened the door, there was a man on top of her with a knife. So my first thought was that I don't like this kind of thing. Kind of reminded me of my mum and dad when I was little. So I started moving towards him in slow motion, ended up fighting with him, wrestling with him. She ran out the room screaming. The bell got pressed. About 200 prison officers came running onto the wing, into the room, and pulled me off. And then I felt my arms being wrapped up. Then I saw him getting wrapped up. They don't really know what's happened because the lady is in shock and ain't explaining it well. So they took him to the block. I could hear him screaming, and then they're just about to bend me up. I'm going, Gov, I ain't done nothing. She was over there with 3 officers. It was all the uniforms was around. And then they started to bend my hands, grab my neck, started to let me walk and everything. And just as I was walking past her, she came running over. I said, no, don't take him. It's not him. So then they left me on the wall with the prison staff, and I was being held there, and I was looking like that. I was kind of sad. I was thinking, this is just my luck, this is. And then a senior officer came over and said, let him go. And then he walks me up to myself. He goes, I'll tell you what I'm saying. I'm saying that you're a hero. That's what he said to me, Mr. Baker.
Inside, violence had its own economy, and hits could be very lucrative.
So in the early days, the older lot, they didn't really like bullies, and they would protect you. You wouldn't really be able to rob anybody in prison like the way that it is now, and from the way it changed in the 90s, because a lot of the old school, they didn't see that as, the right thing to be done. And then a hit or contract could be put out on you and you will get severely hurt. What they call a hit is a contract. Like a hitman, you've seen them on the telly, on the outside, some men shoot people for other people for money motivation and getting thrills out of it also. But in prison, it runs similar, but the characters that do them on the outside are not necessarily the ones that do it on the inside. It's more the addicts, more the ones that are in need that day. Will you do that for me? Can you throw the hot fat over him or throw sugar and water over him? These are the kind of things that happen in those environments where rivals are falling out with each other. So a man will come to me, I'll give you this, 3 or 4, £50 worth of this or £100 worth of this drug. If you get somebody or you do it, you can throw hot water, sugar over him, I'll give you that. If you throw hot cooking oil over him, I'll give you that. And if you stab him or you do that or seriously harm him or whatever the level of harm that the seller who wants the hit done and the contract by way of violence done, he will pay you accordingly to the damage that he wants done. So the worse the harm, the more you get paid.
Drugs have always been part of prison life, something Yammy would come to understand only too well.
In the early days of the 80s, when I first went to adult prison, it was more of a case of a bit of cannabis, a bit of puff, very quietly done, where you go and meet a man, or you're getting half-ounce tobacco deals for probably 2 joints and that kind of stuff, or, the more burn you got, the more cannabis you can buy, but, it puts you to sleep. It's done quietly, it smells a bit more, but the staff never seemed to be that bothered about it. So when heroin came, it's a new breed of criminals, of course, coming in. It was frowned upon in the early days of my institutional stays, but in the 90s, loads of men were doing it, and there was a lot of men who had spiraled out of control, like me. For that generation, if there's 4 or 5 drug dealers on a wing, then you've got more chances. You can go to this one if you don't get on with that one. If you owe that person, but you don't pay him, and you end up running up debts all over the place. Some people run off when they can't pay the debts. I would always stay and take my chances of, okay, I can't pay you money, but I'll do you a favor when you want me to, when something comes up. So I'd always get involved and in between other people's enemies with each other. And there was a lot of men now, like me, I was noticing, who was doing similar things to me. And sometimes you end up smoking drugs together with that person, or you all end up going halves with each other to get it. But of course, with heroin and smoking it, you develop a habit and a physical dependency. So if a job or a hit or a contract or anything by doing somebody a favor so you can get it, the idea will be more appealing.
Yammy spent time in Category A prisons, places reserved for some of the most dangerous men in Britain.
All dispersal, Category A's are round about the same, surrounded by violent killers. Obviously, there's a protection wing for the rapists and the child killers and that kind of stuff. The different type of inmates from all other prisoners are remarkably different, because that most men on those landings, in those Category A's, are either seriously violent or like armed robbers, murderers, men, I don't know, it's just men that have been on the front page of the newspapers. In the Category A's, the violence, most of the time, the inmate will end up as being attacked or comes off worse in a battle with another inmate. You end up going outside hospital because the kind of injuries that happen in there. So I always say when 2 killers fight, no one wins really, because it's who's going to do the most damage, because they don't want you lying around afterwards. So they're going to try and harm you severely. You can always use the sugar and water tactic, because if you scold somebody with that, he's going to scream, the bell's going to go, or he's going to be harmed, he's going to get moved for his own safety. So you live to see another day with not going to be able to be attacked by the person you've injured unless you go to another Category A after that, where you bump into that person who's not going to forget what you did to them in that jail. In fact, I've seen other men who have committed acts of violence in those Category A's turn up at another Category A, and those that he's harmed are in that Cat A at that time, and as soon as he steps through the door, steps on that exercise yard, they all start pelting towards him, or he gets attacked straight away. Most of the time he's meant to be expecting it, because the Cat A's, it's only, when you're a Category A, you can only go around the 4 or 5 jails. So if you have too many incidents, you end up going around them 2, 3 times. But the kind of violence, I saw a prison officer get thrown hot fat over him, and the man ended up staying in the block forever for that, and he got extra charges and he got sentenced. I've seen men stabbed to death in the Category A's.
The whole prison scene changed when gangs took over.
In the old days, coming through the system, there was no such thing as gang culture. You used to go into the recess and have a one-on-one fisticuff fight, and the winner, you shake hands afterwards, or you lose, or people would be in there saying, no one join in, it's not one of those ones. But now the system has completely changed. Gangs off the streets from Birmingham, Liverpool, Manchester, London, from all sides of every city. You know, they've got names of their gangs. They get long sentences. Their friends come. Their enemies from rival gangs come. And then, you know, it depends who's got the biggest gang. But there's no stopping if, like, there's 5 members of a gang now and one of their rivals turn up. Those 5 will come sprinting on the yard now and, you know, hack you and stab you to death. Some don't like to turn up because they know that they're going to be outnumbered in that jail. Sometimes the authorities, if you've played up in one category A, they will send you to another jail where all your enemies are, and you'll be in serious, serious trouble. In the recent times, I was part of all gangs. I was joining all of them because they all had the drugs and everything. So, but I was everyone's bestie, if you get what I mean. So I was in a mix with the London, the Liverpool, with the Manchester, with the Birminghams lot. But when they fought each other, I wouldn't get involved. But I would be in their gangs for other things, away from what's happening in their own cities. I was a bit smart to not get involved because I know if you start doing things for one gang against another, then you know you've got to face that other gang as well. The chances of getting hurt are really, really high, but it's a dangerous game.
After decades inside, Yammy developed a sixth sense for his fellow inmates.
So in the category A's, right, everyone has the potential to be dangerous. They got the principle of mad, bad and sad. You know, the psychologists say, you know, they describe me as being sad because there was bits of loving in there, but I know the difference between what I'm doing and some bits of right and wrong and the accepting of your part in certain things. But there's some inmates on normal location that you quite clearly see they shouldn't be on the wing. They're very, very dangerous, but they're mentally disturbed. But then you've got the evil ones, and I seem to have a sixth sense of being able to identify these men over the long periods of incarcerated, from the YPs, Vanage and Kenneth Erskine, who became serial killers amongst others as well, that I saw in latter stages on other sentences as well. But then in the category A's, I always seem to be able to pick up on the real evil ones just by their presence, but they're not that mentally unwell, if you get what I mean. They're just ball evil.
After spending nearly 4 decades in and out of some of the country's toughest high-security prisons, Yammy's experiences prove that it's never too late to turn your life around.
When I first went into adult prison, after the young boys' prisons, it was very daunting. Yeah, the truth is that I spent 37 years in most jails around the country out of the last 40 years, and now, proud to say that I am crime-free.
Thanks for watching this video with Yammy B about life inside Britain's prison system. For more stories from Britain's underworld, from high-security jails to gangland retribution, be sure to like, hype and subscribe. This is Matt from Underworld Uncut. See you on the next one.